Well, what if I told you that Mr. Smith and Mr. Bogus were not the only ones interested in the Stephen Avery case?
Okay, so as promised from last week, we have a couple guests here that are going to give their thoughts and musings on the Stephen Avery case, including Brendan Dassey. We have Ms. Goodwin here, and we have Mr. Kutzbeck, and they are going to answer some questions that we have for them about this case that we've been talking about for the last 2 episodes.
Yep, and to give everyone full disclosure, when we start going over these questions, Mr. Smith and I are going to kind of just facilitate, because you've heard our opinions on this. This is more about listening to either different or similar opinions from Ms. Goodwin and Mr. Kutzbeck. So you probably won't hear us talking that much. It's really just more about Mr. Kutzbeck and Ms. Goodwin. We want you guys to hear either similar things that we've been talking about. So you'll be like, hey, wow, Mr. Bogus and Mr. Smith do know what they're talking about. Or if there are different opinions, and maybe I'll make you think of new ideas or new avenues that this case could have gone down. So without any further ado, here is our first question. Let's open with what were your general thoughts after watching season 1 of Making a Murderer, with the overall case and the trials for Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey?
Mrs. Goodwin, you want to go first?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Oh, gentlemen.
I feel that after watching the case and hearing all the evidence, that it was a total setup. That's how I feel. Again, I don't base a lot on logic all the time, but gut feeling. And my gut feeling was that these people had it out for Stephen Avery. They did not want to do their job and investigate further. So he was just the perfect scapegoat. I feel like they overlooked a lot of evidence and just assumed things and did not look at all these different avenues that were. It's been a while since I've watched it to remember details, but I just feel like the whole thing was handled poorly and he totally got set up.
Okay, well said. Good.
Yeah, for me, it's been a few years since I've watched it, but I know walking through the hallways with Mr. Bogus and Mr. Smith, it always pops up at least 2 or 3 times throughout the school year. So we're always discussing it. So it's pretty fresh in my memory. The main thing that I got from it was it's clear that, at least clear to me, that they did not like Stephen Avery. They wanted to either get him back or find a way to put him in jail for the past experiences, as far as the whole other case where he was found guilty when he really wasn't. But what kind of sticks out is watching the whole thing, it seems like he could have done it, but not in the way that they're saying. I think they are so focused on setting him up or making it seem like it's him. I think they used or found so many different ways to make it show that he was guilty, where they kind of glossed over the stuff that actually, if they had just stuck with the actual facts and the evidence, maybe the case could have been more legit. So I think they were so focused on making it seem that they were him that it almost went the other way, where it's like, well, it can't be him because this is all not true and just extra stuff. So I think that the police they were so just
Like fixated, right?
obsessed with it that they almost went too far, and that kind of it steered it the other way where it's like, well, it's very clear that they're kind of making these things up.
So I'm going to just add a little bit to that question at the end of it. So you both think that obviously it looks like Stephen Avery didn't do it. And so having said that, if you think that the police were so fixated, or there's two angles here. Did the police set him up knowing full well that he didn't do it? Or was it sort of he's got to be guilty, we're just going to add to the evidence to make sure that he doesn't get off again because he got off on the first 18-year charge, the first rape case. And so I guess what I'm asking you is, do you think that there was some dastardly motive here from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department? Or was it just we think that that Stephen Avery is such a bad dude that of course he did this, and we're going to make sure that he gets put away for a long time? Which would you lean toward?
You want to go first, Mrs. Goodwin?
Yes, please. Thanks. I definitely think that this is my perception. Small towns or whatever, I know, I think that people have reputations, people have mindsets about certain people, prejudices, if you'd like to say that, bias.
Yeah.
That I feel like they had an agenda with this guy. They always have. And I feel like they wanted him in jail. And they definitely, this is just how I feel, that they put the evidence to solidify that he was out of the way, just to make it, I just feel like the police were dirty in how they handled it. And I do think they had a personal agenda and they didn't want to look any further. And I forgot about that. They were suing. Stephen Avery was suing them. I mean, that right there, for the first time they put him in jail, in my eyes, was a definite setup.
Yeah, I think that there's the way they found evidence or the way things kind of went down, it was all too convenient. I think it was just way too much stuff that it just didn't make sense, and it wasn't factually accurate. Like things that they said happened just couldn't have happened. So I think, yeah, there probably was a little bit of kind of get back or wanted to get him back for suing or for other things, other reasons. But yeah, I definitely think that they had him in his sights and they kind of used this as a way to kind of get him.
Not to interrupt, but I think that like I said, when people have a mindset or a perception, it's almost like they justify their behavior.
Right.
Like, we know it, it had to be him. So we are the law and we're just going to make it, we're going to make it so he goes to jail and we're doing the right thing. They have definitely coerced or had it set in their head. That's just how I feel.
And if that is true, that kind of takes you down a different rabbit hole where, do they know who actually did it, or did they actually do it and set him up? So that's
right. So the third option here that we sort of kicked around in the last episode was, so the first two choices basically that I gave you was either the police set him up, they either don't care or know who the real murderer is, or they don't know who the real murderer is, but it was just so convenient to pin it on Stephen Avery that they wanted to, but then the question is, well, where did they get the key? Where did they get the evidence and all this kind of stuff? So the third option would be that whoever did kill her knew that the police would be all over Stephen Avery, and they, after 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 8 days, whatever, planted the evidence so that the police could find it. So the third option, I guess, is it's not so much the police doing all of this, but maybe whoever was involved knew that, well, wow, they're looking at Stephen Avery. Why don't we just make sure that they seal the deal on this? What do you think about that? Is that plausible?
I think that's plausible, but
I think it's possible. That wouldn't be my first guess. I always come back to I forget the detective's name. It was like Andy Colburn.
Andy Colburn.
Was that the
Andy
one
Colburn,
who
yep.
he saw the vehicle? He'd had the vehicle's license plate like days before it was found. Yeah, like I always come back to that. Like, how is that? How was that possible if they weren't somehow involved or knew right away who it was or what was going on? I don't think it was somebody totally different who after a few days just decided to kind of pin it on him and plant that evidence, just because I think there was so much stuff going on that I mean, it could have happened, yeah, but I think that the police early on either knew who it was or were actually involved in it.
All right, so I think that could lead us right into question 2, since we've already kind of talked about it a little bit. I think it's a good segue. So, with the Brendan Dassey, we haven't talked about too much, but his confession helped the investigators get new warrants and go back to the Avery property again. And this is like months and months later. And a lot of the crucial evidence that was used in the trial against Stephen Avery was found after the Brendan Dassey confession. So that was like a critical part. Like, if they didn't have the confession, they wouldn't have gone back and found things like the key and the bullet fragment and stuff like that. So let's talk about Brendan Dassey for a few moments here. Do you think his confession was coerced? Do you think it was a real confession? And if you want to, you can add in, do you think he's guilty, not guilty, or just collateral damage?
Go ahead, this is a good one.
well, you already know, Mr. Bogus, how passionate I was during the case watching that. Definitely Brendan, is it Brendan Dassey?
Yes, yep.
Right?
Yes.
Was a young man who obviously was easily coerced, and we saw that hours and hours of how they interviewed him. And the first time, I know, hours, they definitely coerced that kid, and he did not have the intellectual ability to understand what was happening. He was collateral damage, I guess. He just was the means to an end.
Refresh my memory.
That's how I feel. I get very upset about that.
Yeah.
Did Brendan, was he offered a lawyer? Did he ask for a lawyer? I can't remember.
No.
So there's a lot of betwixt and between stuff with that, in that that they did call Barb and say they were going to talk to him, and she was like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. But they said, we're just gonna talk to him. They never kind of elaborate, like, we're probing him or we're interrogating him in this whole situation. And when he confesses to it, there's that really gut-wrenching scene where they say, like, Brendan says, all right, so can I go back to 4th period now? And they're like, why? And he goes, well, I have an English project due today that I want to present. And they're like, yeah, you're not going back to school. Do you realize what you just said? And he's like, uh-huh. And they're like, we're going to take you to jail. And that's when, like, Barb comes in then, and he does the whole, they got to my head, I didn't really mean those things, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, that's when it was like, oh, I should have been here, or, should have had a lawyer, things like that. So, yes, there was like an opportunity for somebody to provide it, but not everything was disclosed properly.
And a lot of this happened months after, which if you're of the mindset that the police had something to do with sort of the architects of this case, this was in, I think, March that they went to his school, took him out, and interviewed him, which was precipitated by his cousin, who went to the police and sort of, she on the stand, she basically admits that she fabricated a story about Brendan, and maybe thought that he was involved in something, and then the police then go and get him, and then once Brendan sort of confesses, or is coerced to confess, whatever, however you want to look at it, then the chips started falling into place on Stephen Avery. So it was, it's very, the way the timeline of this case goes is super suspect.
Mhm.
Pardon the pun.
Oh, big time.
And the things Brendan
Mhm.
confessed to just doesn't add up with like simple forensics or simple like
Right.
DNA. When he talks about what they supposedly did to her in one of the rooms.
And they knew at that moment of the confession, they knew they had enough to keep him, and they knew they had enough to, but they knew that it probably wouldn't hold up. So that's why Kratz's private investigator had to get him in a room and had him write, what did you do? Draw a picture here, all of that kind of stuff. And it's, the coercion just continued after that. So it wasn't just an isolated, couple detectives are frustrated. It went beyond that original interview that was 3-4 hours long.
Yeah, I
They
don't know
were
how you
literally planting the ideas in his head. Sorry.
Yes.
No, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and we showed a little snippet of that where they were saying, with the whole, where did you shoot her? Where did he shoot her? And he was like, the neck. And you're like, no, try again. Where did you shoot her? It's like, the head. Yes, that's right. Shot her in the head. So.
Yeah, and somehow there was no blood in the room with all that happening. No blood or DNA.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing I think we all can agree on is that Stephen Avery is not the cleanliest person. So how he was able to clean all that blood where there is literally no blood evidence ever in that house is kind of special.
I think everyone can agree that it definitely didn't go down the way they said it went down.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And I feel like the justice system, people know it, but they cannot take on, if they minimize the law, okay, think of the ripple effect. So they can't.
They're in too deep now.
Exactly. So these two people are collateral damage.
Yeah.
That's how I.
Yeah, and like you said, small town, not only collateral damage, but it was pretty evident in the documentary. And first of all, full disclosure, we know that the documentary was slanted a certain way, and that's usually what happens with documentaries. But I don't think anybody's going to argue that the Averys were portrayed in sort of they're lower than the low of society kind of thing. I don't think anybody is going to argue that, oh, no, wait, that's wrong. They were actually well thought of. No, I'm pretty, so the leap to think that, hey, they're not even real people kind of thing. That sort of mindset seemed to permeate the whole entire area.
Yeah. I think we'll jump to the next question we have, and that is, so it has been mentioned earlier in our roundtable discussion about the first case where Stephen Avery was found guilty of the rape of Penny Bernstein, spent 18 years in prison, and then later DNA evidence was done in an appeals case, and it was found it was not his DNA under her fingernails or anything else, and so he was set free. Because of that, Stephen Avery was suing Manitowoc County for that wrongful conviction. When the Teresa Halbach murder investigation begins, it is said that Calumet County, a neighboring county, was going to be handling the investigation. And even though it's still in the jurisdiction of Manitowoc, they could only supply resources and technology. That's really it. And if they needed any kind of personnel there, that they had to be supervised by somebody from Calumet County. So, in your opinions from watching the documentary, do you think that they, because of the conflict of interest, that they did stay out of it? And do you think that they should have done less than what we kind of see in the investigation? Should have lesser of a role?
Manitowoc County, is
Yeah.
that what you're saying?
Yes.
They shouldn't have even been involved. My connectivity is bad.
It's
Can you
okay.
hear me?
Yeah, we hear you and see you. Yep.
You go, I don't remember this, I remember the gist of it, but I don't remember the details, so I'm gonna let Adam take this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm not very clear or remember a lot of it, but I think it's very easy to think that both districts or both police forces or whatnot easily could have worked together to figure something out to help one side or the other. It could be, you help me out this time, I'll help you out next time, one of those type deals. So I think it's very easy to think that they had way more influence than they probably should have. I don't think that's hard to think about, but yeah, they definitely probably had more say than what they should have.
And I almost feel like, I just feel like these small towns feel kind of we're above the law. You know, it's almost like they're so sheltered from, I mean, they weren't very small. I live in a very small town, but it just almost seems like they were so out of reality now that I'm recalling.
Well, just to
And
give you,
again, I think,
just to give you an example of the exact thing that you're saying here, throughout this case, obviously the guy, my background here, Andy Colburn, he obviously did not come off very well throughout this case. It certainly appeared that he might have had something to do with this, and yet after this case was closed and there was guilty verdicts and all of that, this guy ran for sheriff. So it's pretty obvious that, you know, they just think, well, you know, I'm an upstanding member of the community. I can do whatever I want. People are going to believe me. And you know what? Let me take let's throw my hat in the ring for sheriff. He didn't win, but just the fact that he thought, you know what, I could probably be elected sheriff after this, kind of a crazy thought.
Yeah, there's definitely some arrogance that you could see with that whole police force, or even then running for sheriff after all this, even after people are saying, like, even questioning you, oh, let me just run for sheriff and even be more in the limelight.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they hung their hat on the fact that they got Stephen Avery put away. And this goes back to our very beginning of our roundtable where everyone was sort of mentioning, like, you know, he was not liked in the community. His whole family was. His family has a shady past. I mean, we're not trying to celebrate the Averys here and saying, oh, they're good, wholesome people. They've done some bad things, and they were looked upon as like scum of Manitowoc. And that, you know, when they got both people put away, the sheriff's department like took it as like a huge victory. We got these people off the streets. Our community is safer now because of it. We're all heroes. It's
almost like they took it with the first case. The police took it personal that he got away the first time, even though
absolutely,
they're the ones who screwed up. Like he had nothing to do with it. They kind of took it personal, like, oh, he got away, but it's just weird.
I mean, they totally undermined the whole judicial system. I mean, they totally have no regard for anything. Which is scary.
Yeah, good. All right, so let's go into our next question, which is talking about the media. Obviously, this is a documentary, so it's done by the media. Mr. Smith already mentioned that, of course, it has sort of a theme that they're trying to do for and slanted a certain way so that everyone will have an opinion at the end of it. But what do you think, while watching it, the role of media, how they were involved, and then after, when you kind of just see now, like on the internet and this huge phenomenon has become worldwide, like what are your thoughts about that as well?
I'll let you go, Adam.
All right. So I've had discussions with Mr. Smith and Mr. Bogus about media for the past few years. I think we're in a time right now where it's very hard for either side of the media to kind of play it right down the middle. I think this case is a good example of that. You have the documentary where it's obviously slanted towards Stephen Avery. They want to show things that were done wrong or he's possibly innocent. And then I think you had the media outside of that, like when this happened or even now, where let's face it, media usually chooses sides. It's not how it should be. It's not how we want it to be, but unfortunately that's how it happens. And I think each side of this, whether it's the lawyers for the police or lawyers for Stephen Avery, they're going to choose a side of the media that's going to help them either win their case or show what they want to show. Whether it's the news conference that the prosecutors had during this case when they came on and started telling people everything, even if it was true or not true, or the documentary leaving things out or kind of exaggerating things. It's just very hard for the media to stay down the middle, which if they did, I would think benefit more people than it does now. But unfortunately, it's kind of the times we're in where media's tough right now.
I do recall, wasn't the lawyer like that reminded me, because I kind of forgot, it's been a while, but the one lawyer kept planting these seeds in the media. And yep. people are so influenced. You know, it was like, oh, I'm sorry, we can't put that in there, but yeah, everybody heard it. You know what I mean? I just think the media, yeah.
Right before they had jury selection, before the trial began, before they had jury selection, Ken Kratz, the prosecutor, had a huge press conference, and many would suggest that this was actually the nail in the coffin before the trial even began. That's where he detailed, again, the confession from Brendan Dassey, where that they had Teresa Halbach tied up and they sexually abused her, and then they slit her throat, and all these gruesome details that, you hear that and you're automatically like, well, this guy needs to go away for life. And his trial had not even begun yet. They did not even have jury selection or anything like that. So,
and it turned out they had no evidence to support any of those claims.
Any of that.
Yeah, because those couldn't even be brought up in court, could they?
They originally were charges at the beginning of the trial, but then the defense team of Buting and Strang motioned to have some of those charges dismissed towards the end. And the judge did grant those because they had, again, like Mr. Smith said, no evidence to support any of those things. And the other telling thing is that they had this confession from Brendan Dassey that they referenced all the time throughout the trial. Never had Brendan Dassey come on the stand to testify. So,
now, could the
there's
defense
so many
have chosen
variables.
Sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Goodwin, then Mr. Kutzbeck, you can go.
No, I was just going to say, again, there's so many variables in this case that if you weren't somebody that understood that this Brendan Dassey had limited cognitive ability, you know what I mean? I mean, the kid definitely did not understand, any of it, and just went along to make them happy. I mean, there's just so many variables in this that people don't realize. You know what I'm trying to say? And yeah. I get passionate about this. I'm going to start crying.
You might get more clicks and more likes, so go ahead. You go, Mr. Kutzbeck.
No, yeah. I mean, I would assume it's being a smaller town or smaller city when they had that press conference before the trial. I'm pretty sure everyone either tuned in or heard about it eventually. So I would assume some of the people who heard it ended up on the jury, which is kind of a hard thing to overcome it for the defense. Those people already have it in their head. They've heard this. How do we get them to think a different way?
Yeah, there's a great scene in documentary where Buting and Strang are reading the jury surveys. Like, so when, you get selected for a jury, they, you fill like jury surveys, whatever. They're going through the paperwork and looking at them, and like every single one is, I think he should be thrown away. I think he should be executed. I think, he's terrible. He's awful. I'm going to say he's guilty. And like, they're going through hundreds of them, and there's not like a single one that says, I'd give him a fair trial. I think he might be, not guilty.
Yep.
All right. So that would bring us to our last question. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Let's go. Go ahead. No,
was the jury was the jury from that area? Wasn't
was
that one of the things too?
Yeah, it was in Calumet County. So
Which
that
was
was supposed to be
close
a
by.
neutral site, but I mean it's right next door. It would be like, Montgomery and whatever
Like
counties.
Fulton County.
Yeah, Fulton,
Yeah,
Fulton, Montgomery County. Yeah.
I mean, the media
Okay,
around
yeah.
here, I mean, it would be very similar to around here in that we basically have two cities that produce major news channels. We got Utica on one side and Albany on the other. And, you're going to hear about this case. There was news media coverage at every single little hearing, every single little thing. And I would guess that it would be extremely hard unless you're living under a rock to not know about this case and know some of the details about this case.
All right, so that brings us to our last question, and there's no easy way of saying this, but do any of you believe we'll ever see Stephen Avery or Brendan Dassey free from prison?
Go ahead, Ms. Goodwin.
Well, what I would like to say is I would like to say yes. However, I understand the repercussions that the legal system would suffer and the police departments would suffer and the bureaucracy and all of the breakdown would happen if they did investigate further and find out the corruption that was involved in this case. I feel like these are two people. In my heart, I would love to see them out because, Mr. Bogus, I was passionate about it, the injustice of it. But I feel like there's so many things it would unravel for the legal system that it won't happen.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. But I think it's gone on for so long, so much money invested. And if they were to get out, it would cost the police department, the town, the city even more money on top of that with legal fees and probably another suit, I would imagine, that there's no way at this point that either of them will get out. There's just too much to lose for the other side at this point.
I'm gonna throw one more question at you before we close, and maybe you have an idea, maybe you don't. So if you don't think Brendan Dassey and Stephen Avery committed this murder, is there anyone you could point to that you think maybe gut feeling?
The guy behind you.
you think it was Andy Colburn?
So three different theories. Either the police department were the ones who did it, or like kind of helped somebody who knew her. The ex-boyfriend.
Ryan Hilgis, yeah, we talked about him.
And then
I forgot about the ex-boyfriend.
The ex-boyfriend, and then was it Brendan's brother?
Bobby Dassey, yep.
Bobby Dassey, Scott Tatum.
Those are the three different ones. So the ex-boyfriend, Bobby Dassey, or the police department, or like the police department with the help one of those two.
All right.
So there you have it. So this has
I
been
changed my answer.
You're gonna change your answer? Go ahead. Let's go.
You gonna copy me, Miss Goodwin?
I don't think you're right. I forgot about the boyfriend. It's been a while since I've seen this, but I think you're right. It might be the boyfriend.
He was a weird dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He knew a lot too.
Knew too much.
Yep.
He seemed to know too much. Yeah.
All right, awesome. So again, this has been another episode of Case by Case. This has been a bonus episode from the Serial Thrillers. We want to say thank you to our guests, Mr. Kutzbeck, Ms. Goodwin, and what do we always say, Mr. Smith and the round table?
We solve them all. We solve them all.
Until we, I don't know what you say.
Keep all this in. Keep all this in.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
All right.